Hi, I'm Greg Pollock, and you're watching Advanced Components. In this lesson, we're going to be going over scope slots and render props. Learning about these two patterns will help you extend your component's behavior, keep things more modular, and maintainable. Let's jump into it. Our starting code looks something like this. We have a div, we include view, we have our root component, which just contains some data. Then we'll declare a products list component, which takes in products, and our template simply iterates through those products and prints out each product name. We'll use this component, like so, and we'll see this in our browser. Here comes our first problem. What if this is a reusable component across our application, and sometimes we need to show the product's image so that it looks like this? One way we could extend our component is by adding a new prop called showImage, which is a Boolean, which defaults to false. And then we'll use vShow to show our product image if we need to. To use this, we simply use the prop showImage equals true, and then we get two lists of products, one that has our images. This implementation is completely valid. However, what happens when our customer needs to display products in different ways? Like sometimes with sale price, sometimes with add to cart buttons, sometimes with different styles or different bullets, right? Our component can become full of vIfs and vShows with all different options and get really messy and brittle. There must be a better way. Let's jump back into our original code and try to solve this problem differently. Notice here I'm not showing the root node with data, just assume that that's there. The problem we want to solve is, once again, sometimes show the product's image, but this time also let's uppercase the product's name. How might we implement this using a scoped slot? Well, first we specify a slot, just like you normally would, giving it a name, but we also give it a slot prop of product equals product. This allows you to pass data from the child into the parent to access this data, which we'll do in a minute. If we ran this code as is, it would work, no problem, because by default, it prints out the product name. Now let's use our new slot from our parent to display things differently. Up on top, I'm going to write product list products, just like before, but then I'm going to specify the slot product and specify a slot scope equals slot props. The first time I access the slot, the value of the slot props is equal to this, as you see here. So I'm simply going to use that data, slotprops.product.image and product.name.toUpperCase, to change the way I want the product displayed. Second time I access slot props, it gives me this data. So now if I jump into my browser, this is what I'm going to see. As you can see here, now I can use the products list component and specify how I want my products to be displayed. This is a good opportunity to use some destructuring with slot props. So here you see I have slot scope equals bracket product. So I'm taking out that particular item inside of my object. Then inside my slot, I can simply use that product object. This makes my code a little more readable. Another example of using a slot scope, in my child template, I might have slot name person and send first name and last name. And then in my parent template, I might use destructuring to simply have first and last. Using this scope slot pattern can be really useful if you're creating a component that should be reusable, or even a component library that you want thousands of developers to use. And we can see this inside of Damien Dulich's Vue Multi-Select library. This is a component library that makes it easy to do multi-select. And if we scroll down into the documentation, we can see if we click on Custom Option Template that it says you can use Option Scope Slot to provide a custom option template. So as you can see here, when I look at the different options inside of this dropdown, I'm able to specify how I want each option to be displayed. And sure enough, if I scroll down and take a look inside the example code, Notice here I use the multi-select component and I specify a scoped slot of option, and I have access to the slot props. And so I can specify how I want each of the options to be displayed. Let's jump back to our original code and our original problem. Sometimes we need to show the product's image and uppercase product name. I just showed you how to solve this problem using scoped slots, and now let's look at how to solve this using render props. In order to do this, we need to be using a render function instead of a template in our component. And if you're not familiar with render functions, we talked about this in a previous lesson. You might want to go back and watch that first. So this template, we can instead write as a render function like so. We're mapping through each of the products and displaying our product name. This renders the same thing as the template you see on the left. So let's replace that inside of our component. And now to use a render prop, we basically are going to pass in a prop as a render function. So we're going to add a new prop. Let's go ahead and do that right now, called product renderer of type function. This is going to have a default that just prints out the product name, because that's the default we want. Then inside of our render function, we're going to call that product renderer, sending in our h and the product object. This prints out the same thing we started with. But now how do we use this render prop to send in a custom render function? Well, back in our root element, we're going to create an image renderer. Here you can see it renders out the product image and calls product.name.toUppercase. This is the function we need to send into our products list component. And we'll do that just like so. This will send in the new render function through that prop, which then will get rendered for each product, giving us this when we open up our browser, as we'd expect. It's worth noting here that if we were using JSX and we're using the Babel plugin, which gives us that functionality, we could just put HTML inline here. And I think it would make it a little more readable. This is another pattern that you're going to see in component libraries, like Vue AutoSuggest. So here inside of the Storybook, where we can check out the functionality for this particular library, we can see that when we start typing, it gives us different options to make it easy to auto-suggest when we're doing search. So same thing, there must be a way for us to change the way each of these auto-suggestions are displayed. And if we look deeper inside of the options, inside the README, we can see that sure enough, we can create a render suggestion function. And look, it even shows you the JSX style of render function. So you can customize the way your suggestions are displayed. Let's review. Scope slots and render props are a great way to take components that you want to share between all different components, maybe inside your app, or maybe even outside your app. So this allows you to extend component behavior. It also keeps your code more modular and therefore more maintainable. Sweet.
Cool. But I'm not going to show you that. I'm not going to show you because I don't like JSX. And like putting HTML inside of your JavaScript. I mean, back in the day, like I used like servlets. Have you heard of Java servlets? They would take HTML and they would put it inside of their Java code. And they thought it was the most amazing thing, but it looked disgusting. Why would you ever put HTML inside of your code? It doesn't make sense. Keep it separate. Use template languages, please. That's just my opinion.
The first time I access the slot props, it's going to... The slot props? That's correct, but it just sounds weird. Sloppy slot props? Slot props. The first time I access the slot props,